Of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, thinking about a new credit card. Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know, I do appreciate it. And I do have a line open if you'd like to call in, join the program. The number to call is 1-877-913-5357, 1-877-913-5357. You can also go to the website at www.prudentmoney.com. Send a question in, and I will take good care of that and make sure that you get your questions answered. Also, if you haven't been to the website in a while, go check it out. It's the new and improved Prudent Money. We've gone through and redone just about everything. And so we'd love for you to go check it out. Lots of great resources there, all to help you out at prudentmoney.com. Well, we're going to be talking about transitioning to a new credit card or just taking out a new credit card. This all came from a question that was posed to me a couple of days ago. Someone that I know sent me an email and said, "Hey, what do you think about the new, I guess too new, but the Apple credit card?" As you know, Apple's has been getting into the banking business, and which is really smart because they have quite the following with developing a savings account and this credit card account. And so I want to talk about that. I'd actually have done the review of the card, and will be up on the website tomorrow. We'll talk about that. I want to mention a couple of things about another situation that's going on that deserves a little bit of time. And we're talking about the debt ceiling. And, you know, it's interesting, and to a degree, I think, pretty irresponsible of the politicians to be messing with, we'll call it another thing, credit lines, because credit and debt are so very, very important to making this economy work. Now, the first thing that you might think of is, well, that could be true, and if I had a credit card that had an unlimited credit limit, and that's really what it does to an extent. Basically means they can buy and spend at will. That in itself is pretty irresponsible that we're running a country like that. But that's what we've been running. I mean, things have been running that way for decades. So it is what it is. And one quote from an author that I had on a couple weeks ago really made me think about, do you want to go through, and that he was talking about the financial crisis back in 2008. Do you want to go through that period and risk the whole financial system melting down, or do you want the government to intervene? And we've seen what has happened when the government doesn't intervene, which was basically the Great Depression, and with the big stock market crash that started in 1929. Can you imagine being an investor? And of course, 1929 was a lot different than it is today, but there are some aspects that remain the same. But can you imagine being an investor and not having the internet, not having really any forms of communication except for maybe, I guess, the radio, but nothing that they could listen to what happened in the stock market. They have to get the newspaper the next day. And can you imagine losing 86% of your account? 86, and most people back in that day lost everything, which prompted the development of the SEC, which prompted new rules and regulations, which I've often said is a lot like what is going to happen to Bitcoin after Bitcoin took a tremendous hit. Let's go back though to the politicians. And you got the Republicans fighting for more fiscally responsible policy, to where they're on board as long as the Democrats agree to cutting spending. Then the Democrats will say, no, we can't cut spending. In fact, we need to increase spending. We want to raise the debt ceiling. And they go back and forth. And it's just, I've written about, I don't really write about it much anymore. I think I posted something today about it. But as far as spending blog time writing about it, I don't, because it's just ridiculous. Because they're sitting there fighting over something that's very, very important. I mean, June 1st is the D-Day that we run out of money and we potentially default on our obligations. And if that were to happen, that spins off a chain of events that it's not going to be good. So there's a couple of things that come to mind. The first one is that I call it political theater. They fight, they argue, they come down to the 11th hour, they agree, they shake hands, everybody gets in a circle and sings Kumbaya. Everything just, it's just right. And everybody's a winner. Nobody lost in this deal. And have you ever noticed that? That when the politicians get together and they argue and bicker and fight over whatever they're debating, nobody's ever right or wrong when it's all said and done. That's like the political, the rule of politics. Nobody's ever wrong. Got to save face, even though one party more than likely gave in more than the other one did, right? So I was thinking about this today. Probably just going through this same thing. Then I got to thinking, what if a party, for political reasons, wanted to kind of shake up the system and see what happens if we went into a default? And I really thought quite a bit about that because, we're just in very dramatic type times. Granted, there's not big crisis going on, not that we can see. There seems to be something still going on in the banking system because regional banks is what you want to watch. Didn't do so hot again today in the stock market. And that has always been a sign of the times that I wonder what's going on, something behind the scenes that has not surfaced yet. Remember, we've got supposedly over 2,000 banks that were in the same situation that Silicon Valley Bank before it went into insolvency. And as I know that's hard to grasp, but for someone who watches these things, it doesn't surprise me at all. So we'll see. We'll see what happens, what they come up with. So far, it's nothing but, grab your popcorn, sit on the front row and watch some political theater. Everything will end up happy and good. And because here's the other thing too, is that if you look at where our government spends money, and, you look at the $100 million for this pet project and the $200 million for this pet project and the $54 billion for this pet project, that you're saving the owl, you're doing whatever it is. I mean, we've talked about this before. It's just some of the most ridiculous things they're spending money on, and it's all to get reelected. That's what the whole point of it is. If you cut all that out, you wouldn't even make a dent in the amount of money that we owe as a country. So at the end of the day, if you're a Republican, does it really matter if you cut spending? Because this is heading, I saw on social media today the impact of a car running into the back end of a trailer. And I don't know how they did all these takes, because you crushed up the car almost every time you did. It started at 7 miles, then it went to 50 miles, 75 miles, 100 miles an hour. And then it got to a point to where the car would run dead into the back end of this big trailer. It got to a point, I think it was at 80 miles an hour, that the engine, you couldn't even hear the engine after it hit. And the collision just became so big and so massive every single time that, because they raised it all the way to 300 miles. I don't know how they did that, now that I'm thinking about it. But 200, 250, something like that. Crazy. And it just crumbled the car. Well, we're heading on that collision path. Now, it depends on whether we hit it going 80 or 150. So at the end of the day, you go, what's most important? Or just pushing it off to the future, or continuing to spend money? I don't know. There's not a good answer to it. But as the world turns, so the soap opera says, we'll see how it all works out. Let's just hope that there's not something bigger politically going on here. That would really be a shame, to allow something like a debt default happen for politically motivated reasons. 1-877-913-5357. We're going to talk about those credit cards on the way on the other side of the break. Stick around. I'll be right back.
The Word for Today is excited to announce the new official online home for the ministry of Pastor Chuck Smith and Kay Smith, PastorChuck.org. At PastorChuck.org, you'll have instant access to thousands of hours of verse-by-verse teaching by Pastor Chuck Smith from Genesis through Revelation, and full access to special messages on subjects such as prophecy and much, much more. Also at PastorChuck.org, a full library of great teachings by Kay Smith, and a section where you can read some of Pastor Chuck's books online, all free of charge. So visit the new official online home of the Word for Today and the ministry of Pastor Chuck and Kay Smith. PastorChuck.org.
This is Rob Randall, your host and teacher of the Invisible War radio program. The Invisible War is the study of God's Word on how to walk in Christ's victory in the spiritual battles we face against the powers of darkness. Join me every Sunday morning at 9 right here on KDKR and KYJC in Commerce, your station for life.
Hi, I'm Jill Taylor, inviting you to join me each Saturday morning at 11 o'clock for Choose Life Radio. You'll hear people from across America sharing their stories of faith, forgiveness, redemption, and restoration. Choose Life Radio will encourage you to fully appreciate the gift of life. You may also find help for you or a friend in need. So please join me Saturday mornings at 11 o'clock right here on Bible School Radio 91.3.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. 1-877-913-5357 is the number to call. If you've got a question for me, a question or a comment, you can go to prudentmoney.com, and there's a tab that if you want to ask a question, it'll be very obvious. Go through that, send us a question. I'll get you taken care of. We'll get your questions answered. That's off the website, www.prudentmoney.com. 1-877-913-5357. Okay. So I got to talking about the debt ceiling a lot longer than I was planning on. So I want to focus in on credit cards, and a couple of things I want to focus in on is you're in a situation where you need to get a new one, or one interests you. That could be the case today because these new credit cards come with different types of features and benefits. Or you're going to transfer one credit card balance to another. So, a couple things you want to understand, and there's a couple things that you need to know. And then there's about penalty rates. But let's start off with interest rates. And this is the first thing and I talked about this today when I was writing the review of the Apple credit card, is that you want to check to see what's the potential interest rate range that you're looking at. And Apple actually had a fairly decent one. I'll compare it to American Airlines. American Airlines was, if you had tip-top, great shape credit, great credit, can't even believe I'm going to say this, 20.74% to 29.74%. I'll come back to that. For the Apple card, the best interest rate was 15% up to 26%. Let that kind of settle in for a second. That to me is unbelievable. Now, I've been watching credit cards and interest rates, wrote a book about it for a very, very long time. And I remember back in the 2000s that the best going rate for good credit was like 7, 8, 9%. Today, 15 to 20%. That's just unbelievable to me. And then there was a big debate in Congress about credit card companies taking advantage of cardholders, credit card abuse, if you will, the way that these contracts are signed up. They had penalty rates, and so they came up with what's called the Card Act. President Obama freshly had been sworn in, brand new in the office, and he was going, and in May of 2009, he signed the Card Act into existence. And I haven't gone back and looked. I wrote about it in my book, Deceptive Money, but I haven't gone back to look. But I do remember them talking about, we need to get rid of penalty rates. You shouldn't be able to charge penalty rates and rates this high. But the politicians are allowing credit cards to get away with 25, I don't think I've seen 30%, but this is close. 29.74%. You could get a credit card. And the banks are just taking advantage of the consumer. 29.74% could be your interest rate. Ladies and gentlemen, 29.74%, unless you're making a lot of money and you can pay a lot of money each month, you're going to be in that debt for a long, long time. To me, that is credit card abuse, no doubt about it. But where they get these ranges is they take the prime rate, which is what banks give to their best customers, and I think right now it's 8.25%. Not good. That's not good either, because prime rate a year ago was 3.5%. 8.5% or 8%, then they add a margin to it, then there you go. There's your range. And, you know, while we're talking about interest rates, go ahead and talk about the fact that these are variable. So every time the federal funds rate moves up, which is what the Fed has control over, we see consumer rates go up, the prime rate go up, and that affects credit cards. But you've got, if you are lured into the credit balance transfer trap, because it can be a trap, to where they give you 0% for 12 to 18 months, whatever it might be. You got to check and make sure what kind of interest rates you're making now, and to forget about that transfer unless you think that before the beginning of the interest, when the interest rate comes back to double digits, that you're going to be able to take advantage of this and pay it off. There are some ways to use those zero interest transfers as in a strategy to get out of debt, but for most people, they're not thinking that. But you got, if you're right now, for instance, if you're sitting at 15 or 16%, I would not move that money. And then there is the most of what's in the card member agreements across the board is anti-consumer, and we're gonna look at a little bit of that. But make sure that you understand what the rates are. Make sure that you understand that there are penalty rates, which are not good. And then there are, what's the reward program? I've always talked about reward points and reward programs that your best bet is to save them for travel. I still believe that. However, that American Airlines, with its interest rate range of 20.74 to 29.74, that's just insane. But I go into on my blog for tomorrow about the Apple Card, how they're very, very simple program that's laid out. Because I compared it to Discover's cashback card. And they get 5% on Discover, and the Apple Card, it gets up to 3% depending on the circumstances. Discover's up to 5% depending on the circumstances. And I got to thinking, I was looking at, my eyes were just about to roll in the back of my head as I was reading some of this. It's almost impossible, unless you're willing to spend a ton of research time, which I'm not, trying to figure out which one has got the better deal. They're really about the same, probably, when you get it all said and done, because there's a lot of restrictions and limitations and a bunch of different situations, and probably for most people, they're not going to hit that number, and to where they get the 5% or they get the 3%, unless they know their program extremely well. One of the big marketing pushes for a lot of these companies, it is for Apple, is that they say there's no fees whatsoever. Well, the problem is that doesn't mean that you can be late 20 months in a row and it'd be okay. Because these contracts are loaded with default clauses. And basically how they can shut your account down, how they can lower your credit limit, they can decline your ability, they can limit your ability to make transactions, they can begin collection activities, they can suspend or close your account. So let me ask you a question. The normal person who is, because that's what I always said, is that they're marketing to the marketplace they want to take ownership of. It's people who hate fees when they're late, because they're late a lot. And someone who's accumulated a lot of credit card debt and trying to balance the payments and do all that understands how difficult it is to avoid late fees sometimes, because you're human, you make mistakes. So the person that's just habitually late, at some point, the credit card companies go, we're done with your high risk behavior, and we're going to close your account down, throw you in collections, and they can do that. Would it be better for you to get the late fee and maybe motivate you not to do that? I mean, it's kind of crazy. Even though, it's nice to not have fees, but there's a dark side. I mean, they could do that after you were late one time. That's the way the contracts are written. And that's what is very troublesome about that. I'll tell you what, tomorrow we will pick back up where I left off and go over the rest of this. I think it is good information for you, what you need to know. This is Bob Brooks. You got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.